Back in 2014, I was working as a trail maintenance worker for the Forestry Service in a remote stretch of the Pacific Northwest, somewhere between the mist-covered ridgelines of Olympic National Park and an area that didn't even have a proper name on most maps. My job was part seasonal, part voluntary, a rotating assignment where workers could spend time in the field keeping the trails safe and clear. When I volunteered for a 2-week solo shift in a ranger cabin, I thought I was lucky. Some time away from everything. No cars, no emails, no human chatter, just the forest, my axe, and the smell of pine. The cabin I was assigned to was a 12-mile hike from the nearest dirt road, itself an hour from any town worth mentioning, accessible only by foot or horseback. No electricity, no plumbing, no cell service, just a battery-operated radio for emergencies. The place was old, but solid, hand-built from Douglas fir back in the 60s, with a tin roof and a stone chimney, a single room with a cot, a stove, shelves of dusty trail logs, and a small wooden writing desk beneath a window that looked out into the trees. The hike-in was beautiful, if a bit grueling. It was mid-September, and the forest was wearing its autumn coat, flashes of amber, orange, and deep wine red scattered among the evergreens. The trail was narrow, winding like a lazy river through dense groves of cedar and hemlock. Mushrooms pushed up through damp soil, and the air was thick with the smell of moss, smoke, and cold, wet bark. Ravens followed me for miles, their croaks echoing overhead. I arrived at the cabin just before dusk. Everything looked in order. There was a faint smell of wood smoke inside, like someone had recently used the fireplace. I chalked it up to the last ranger who had probably been stationed there. They kept the place clean. A small axe hung on the wall beside a note. Water pump is busted. Stream still flows strong 200 yards downhill. Stay warm. I unpacked my gear, set up the lantern, and made a modest dinner. Instant chili and coffee over the camp stove. I jotted down some notes in the ranger log, mostly about trail conditions on the way up, then crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted off to the sound of wind slipping through the cracks in the logs. The first 3 days were uneventful, even peaceful. I cleared some fallen branches from the trails, marked a couple of weak bridges for repair, and took long, quiet walks through the woods. I'd sometimes talk to myself just to break the silence. The only sounds were birds, distant owls, and the creaking of trees shifting their weight in the breeze. But by the 4th night, something changed. It was cold that evening, the kind of cold that settles in your joints and doesn't let go. I made a small fire in the hearth and sat with a book under the dim glow of the lantern. The smell of the old pages, mixed with the wood smoke and damp wool of my sweater, created a strangely comforting bubble. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured steps crunching through the pine needles around the cabin. I froze.
At first, I assumed it was an animal, a deer, maybe an elk. But the steps didn't wander. They circled, steadily, deliberately. You could feel intent in the rhythm. My heart thudded. I turned off the lantern, and the room sank into darkness. The only light came from the flickering fire and the faint silver glow of the moon beyond the window. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. Then, knock, knock, knock. Not a bang, not a thud, a light, rhythmic tapping on the back wall. I didn't move. My breath was shallow. I could hear the wind stirring the leaves outside, but this sound was distinct, unmistakable. After a long minute, I crept toward the side window. avoiding the loose floorboards that creaked. I peeked through a slit in the curtain, but I couldn't see anything through the trees. Then my eyes caught it, on the ridge, about 40 yards away, partially silhouetted against the moonlight.
A figure, tall, unmoving, watching. My skin went cold. The shape was so still, it looked like a scarecrow, but it wasn't. The outline was unmistakably human, though it lacked detail, just shadow and suggestion. I grabbed the radio and clicked it on. "Base, this is Trail Echo 7. Do you read?" Static. "Echo 7 to base? I have a possible trespasser at the North Ridge. Please respond." More static, hissing like something breathing just on the other end. I turned it off. That night, I barely slept. I kept the fire going low and the axe close. I thought of locking the cabin door, but it didn't have a lock, just a simple latch. Morning eventually came, bringing with it a weak, gray light that felt more like moonlight overstaying its welcome. I stepped outside and checked the area. No sign of the figure.
But there were boot prints, one set, encircling the cabin. They were deep, clean, unmistakably human. The size was off, though. Too long. The stride, too short. I followed them as far as I dared, but they disappeared into the woods without a trace. The rest of the week bled together in a haze of half-sleep, paranoia, and the unbearable knowledge that I wasn't alone. Every night, footsteps, knocking. The figure. Sometimes I'd spot him standing in different places. The edge of the woods, halfway up the trail, even once by the creek. Always far enough to doubt, but close enough to feel watched. I stopped reading, stopped writing. My meals grew smaller, rushed. I kept the fire going constantly, even during the day. And still, the cold lingered. One night, I thought I saw him closer, standing just beyond the front porch, motionless in the dark. But when I dared open the door, there was no one. Only the scent of damp pine and a faint metallic tang in the air, like blood on iron. On the second to last night, I found something by the window.
A pine cone, perfectly split in half. And next to it, a set of boot prints, facing the window. He'd been there, watching me from inches away. That broke me. I packed at first light, left my reports half finished, didn't care. I hiked 12 miles straight through, barely stopping for water. My legs burned, my chest ached. When I reached the ranger station, I must have looked like a ghost. I told them everything, not expecting belief, just needing to say it out loud. The senior ranger, a woman in her 50s, just listened. When I was done, she nodded. "Yeah, that guy's been seen up there before." I stared at her. No one knows who he is, but he never gets close unless you talk to him. I swallowed hard. I didn't say a word. She nodded again. "Then you're lucky." That was a decade ago. I haven't gone back. But sometimes, when the wind's right, I swear I still hear that knock. 3 beats. Always 3. My dad was a conspiracy nut, the real tinfoil hat type, the kind who talked about government psyops over dinner and taped black trash bags over the windows just in case. He didn't trust anything, or anyone, except the idea that civilization was about to collapse and only the prepared would survive. So, in late 1999, just before the Y2K panic reached its peak, he moved us, me, my mom, and him, to a remote patch of land in interior Alaska. And when I say remote, I mean there were no roads. We had to take a bush plane and hike half a day just to reach it. There were no neighbors, no towns, no radio towers, just endless snow-covered pine forests and silence. My dad had spent years planning this. He used all his savings to build what he called the fallback. It was a fallout shelter dug 12 feet into the frozen earth, lined with concrete and steel. No windows, no fresh air, no sunlight, just artificial light from buzzing fluorescents, the hum of a propane generator, and the occasional thunder of wind battering the thick metal hatch above us. And it was cold. I mean, bone-chilling cold.
We lived there for 4 years. I was 8 when we moved in. By the time we left, I was 12. My world was concrete walls, canned beans, iodine tablets, and the smell of diesel fuel and mold. We had a well pump for water and a set of bunk beds welded to the wall. The walls were always cold to the touch, a kind of dead cold that crept into your bones and never quite left. Every morning started with the sound of my dad cycling the generator, followed by the low grumble of canned heat trying to fight off the chill. There was a single air vent that ran vertically from the surface down to our shelter. Dad called it the lung of the bunker. It was a metal pipe about 10 inches wide with a cover at the top. He'd rigged it with a mesh screen to keep out snow and animals, but sometimes when the wind hit just right, it made this eerie, howling sound, like a distant scream traveling through the earth. My mom tried to make the place feel like home. She hung some old calendars on the wall, tried to celebrate holidays, and read me bedtime stories by flashlight. But after the first year, even she began to fade. She stopped smiling. Her hands shook when she cooked. I once caught her just staring at the wall for hours, eyes unfocused. Dad, though, he was in his element, reading his survivalist manuals, checking his radiation meters, even though there was no war, logging imaginary radio signals. He'd sit by the shortwave radio for hours, just listening to static and claiming he heard patterns.
Then came the night I woke up to the whisper. I'll never forget it. The bunker was pitch black except for the glow from the emergency lamp hanging above the bunks. It gave off this faint, flickering greenish hue, like a firefly caught in a bottle. I was half asleep, sweating under too many blankets when I heard it. Andy. It was a whisper, soft, barely louder than breath, but it was right above me. Andy, come up. They're gone. At first I thought I was dreaming. I shut my eyes tight, willing it away. But then I heard it again, closer, clearer. Come up. The voice came from the air vent. I bolted upright, heart thudding. My breath came out in white clouds. I stared up at the black circle of the vent, suspended in the ceiling like a hole into another world. Nothing. Just the usual creaks of the bunker. I climbed down from my bunk, bare feet on icy concrete, and padded to my parents' room. I shook my dad awake. There's someone in the vent. He was up in an instant. No grogginess, just calm, mechanical response. He pulled his rifle from the wall and climbed the ladder to the hatch like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. The metal hatch groaned as he opened it. Cold air spilled down like a waterfall. I waited in the silence that followed. No footsteps, no voices, just wind. Then Dad called down, "There's no one here." But I saw it in his face when he came back down. He was pale, even under the yellow light. "There are footprints," he said. He didn't elaborate, but later that day, when I went up with him, I saw what he meant. Around the entrance to the hatch, dozens of them. Bare human footprints, dozens. Some small, like a child's, some large, no shoes, just feet, toes splayed against the frozen crust, and they led nowhere. They circled the bunker, some right up to the vent pipe, but none of them led away. As if they'd come up from the earth and vanished. We stayed underground for 3 more weeks. My dad doubled the shifts on the generator so we wouldn't have to surface. He blocked the vent with extra mesh and nailed wooden planks over it. But at night, when the wind blew just right, we could still hear it. Not howling, whispering. Once, I swear I heard my own voice calling from the pipe, repeating my name, like an echo I never said. My mom started crying in her sleep. One night, I found her sitting beside the hatch mumbling, "They're already in. They're already in." After the 3rd week, Dad made a decision. We packed up what we could, buried the rest, and hiked out. Didn't wait for spring. Just took the sled, the sat phone, and whatever we could carry. I remember glancing back as we left and seeing something, just for a second, watching from the tree line. Tall, thin, not moving. We got a new place after that. Warmer, closer to town. My dad didn't talk about the bunker again, except once. It was years later. He was older, sicker. I asked him if he remembered the night of the whispers. He looked at me for a long time. "They weren't trying to get in," he said. "They were already inside. We just didn't listen soon enough." He passed a few months later. I've had dreams ever since, of waking up underground, of voices in the walls, of barefoot shapes standing outside my door, whispering through keyholes and vents. Sometimes I wake up and swear I hear the wind breathing, "Andy, come up." But I don't move, not anymore, because I know they're still waiting.
In the spring of 2017, I took a contract gig with a private mineral survey company. The job was straightforward: assess possible mining sites across a swath of desert in southeastern Utah. I was the only geologist on the team, supported by a few field techs and a logistics manager. We were dropped off by chopper about 40 miles from the nearest town, with enough supplies to last 10 days. No electricity, no cell signal, no road access, just tents, GPS gear, field notes, and solar chargers. I've worked in remote sites before, Alaska, Argentina, even Mongolia, but something about this place felt different from the moment we landed. The desert air was dry as bone, thick with dust that clung to your clothes and crusted in the corners of your eyes. The terrain was rugged, jagged sandstone ridges that rose and fell like the backs of sleeping beasts. Sparse scrub dotted the landscape, and the sun was relentless, bleaching everything in sight and baking the earth until it cracked underfoot. We set up camp on a high flat bluff overlooking a canyon. During the day, temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it dropped into the 40s. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, not even the distant buzz of insects. Just emptiness. At first it was peaceful, clean, but after a couple of days that silence started to feel heavy, like the landscape was waiting for something. On the 3rd day, I was hiking solo near a cluster of vertical rock formations about 2 miles from camp. These tall, narrow pillars looked like the fossilized ribs of some ancient creature rising out of the sand. I'd been chipping away at surface samples when I noticed one of the formations had something strange on it, deep red streaks that ran vertically down the rock. At first, I assumed it was oxidation. Iron-rich stone can do that. but when I leaned in, I realized it wasn't mineral staining, it was wet, fresh, sticky. I reached out and touched it with gloved fingers. Warm, not just sun warmed, body warm. My stomach turned. I pulled off the glove and touched it with my bare hand. The red streak clung to my skin, tacky and thick, like half-dried paint, and the smell, it hit me a second later. Coppery, organic, the unmistakable scent of blood. I stepped back fast, heart pounding. The rock around the streaks looked almost like raw, like it had been flayed open. I snapped a few photos with my GPS camera and radioed the others to come check it out. They arrived 20 minutes later. By the time they got there, the streaks were gone. The rock was dry, pale, normal. I showed them the photos. One of the techs joked nervously, "Maybe you found a haunted rock." Another suggested a prank, but no one had left camp that morning. I didn't push the issue. I just marked the site on my GPS and moved on. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I woke to a sound. At first, I thought it was wind, but there was no breeze. The sound was faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable once you heard it. Crying. A woman's voice, distant, echoing from the canyon. Soft, but drawn out in long, choked sobs. I unzipped my tent and stepped out. The desert was pitch black except for the faint silver glow of the stars. The temperature had dropped sharply. Frost coated the water jugs and metal gear. My breath came in little clouds. The sound continued, not moving, just there. "Hello," I called stupidly. It stopped. I stood there for 10 more minutes. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Just the heavy, waiting silence. The next morning I went back to the site. The red streaks were back. Only this time they weren't just on the single pillar. They were on 3 others, in places I knew we hadn't visited yet. Each streak was fresh, dripping, but not from the top of the stone, from within it, like it was bleeding. I called the team again. This time I brought 2 people with me. We all saw it. One of the techs, Jose, reached out and touched it. He pulled back fast. "Shit, it's warm." He sniffed his fingers. "That's blood. That's actually blood." We took photos, samples, everything. We radioed back to HQ, but no one could explain it. I wanted to stay and document, but something in me, instinct maybe, was screaming to leave. That night, we heard the crying again. Louder, closer. One of the tents collapsed at 3 a.m. The poles were snapped, bent inward. The guy sleeping inside swore he saw a shadow standing just outside the fabric, a silhouette with long hair unmoving. Watching, we broke camp that morning. As we packed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. More red streaks, this time on the stones near our tents. Lower to the ground, smudged like something had crawled past in the night, dragging itself along the rocks. We hiked 6 miles to a pickup zone and called in for evac. A week later, the samples we took came back from the lab. The red substance, it wasn't paint, it wasn't plant resin, and it wasn't any known mineral. It was biological, but not human, not animal either, just unknown. I don't take remote desert jobs anymore. I don't go near Utah. I try not to even think about that place. But sometimes I wonder if those red streaks are still there, if someone else will stumble onto them the way I did, and if they'll be smart enough to walk away, or if they'll stay too long and find out what's beneath the stone.
It was supposed to be the kind of quiet escape people fantasize about. Just you, the wilderness, a wood-burning stove, and no responsibilities except keeping the place tidy. My sister Liv and I had both been burned out, for different reasons. I'd quit a toxic job in the city, and she had just ended a bad breakup. The cabin swap program sounded like the perfect reset. Basically, people who own off-grid cabins across the country list them for temporary trades. You get to stay for free in exchange for light maintenance, chopping wood, clearing brush, small repairs, that sort of thing. We sifted through dozens of listings before settling on one tucked deep in the Montana wilderness. It promised seclusion, pristine views, and total disconnect. No power, no plumbing, just a hand pump for water, a well-stocked woodshed, and a cabin with a single room layout. The trip in was half the experience. After a 4-hour drive from Bozeman, we turned off onto a gravel road that got progressively narrower until it dissolved into a footpath. We parked, strapped on our packs, and hiked the final 2 miles. The air was crisp and sharp with the scent of pine sap and wood smoke, even though we hadn't seen another person for hours. Every breath felt like cold water in the lungs.
The cabin was charming, old but solid, made of thick, dark logs with green moss clinging to the joints. It had a pitched roof, a small porch, and a stone chimney already stacked with firewood. The front door creaked when we opened it, revealing a cozy interior. A pair of worn armchairs, a little cast-iron stove, open shelves stocked with dry goods, and 2 twin beds tucked beneath curtained windows. Everything smelled like cedar and ashes. We arrived in the afternoon and spent the first few hours unpacking, collecting kindling, and getting a fire going before the chill set in. That night, we cooked beans and rice over the stove and sat by lantern light playing cards. The kind of peace you read about but rarely get to feel. No buzzing lights, no traffic, just wind, the crackle of fire, and the occasional owl call. The guest logbook sat on the little table near the window, bound in worn leather and filled with entries dating back 10 years. People had left funny notes, sketches of wildlife, recipes, poems. Most wrote about the stillness, the isolation, the stars. It was wholesome in a weird way. But one entry, one small entry tucked between 2 long-winded ones, stuck out. No date, no name, just a single sentence written in tight, blocky handwriting. Don't go outside at night, it hears you. Liv raised an eyebrow. Creepy, she said, but we both laughed. Probably some horror nerd trying to spook the next visitor. I scribbled a smiley face next to it and wrote, "We'll take our chances." That first night passed quietly. We kept the fire burning and fell asleep to its fading warmth. The second night didn't go as smoothly. It started around 1:30 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was Liv talking in sleep, but the voice wasn't hers. It was too low, too dry, like leaves brushing against gravel. Then I heard my name. Emily. I sat up fast. My heart thudded so loud it drowned out everything else. Across the room, Liv was sitting up in her bed too, eyes wide. "You heard that, right?" she whispered. I nodded. We both turned toward the window. The curtains fluttered slightly, even though the air inside was still. Then came the voice again, just outside the cabin. "Liv, Emily, come outside." The voice scratched at the edges of the words. It sounded like someone gargling sand. We turned off the lantern and sat in total darkness. The fire had died to embers. We didn't speak, didn't move. Then came the scratching. Soft at first, on the front door. Slow, steady scrapes like nails dragging across wood. Then again and again. It lasted for over an hour. We sat, curled in our beds, blankets pulled up to our faces, barely breathing. The scratching never got louder, never grew frantic, just methodical, patient. Eventually it stopped. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the first gray light of dawn crept in through the curtains, we finally got up. The cabin was cold and quiet. Liv grabbed the hatchet we kept near the door, and I carefully unlatched it.
Outside, the ground was covered in frost. Our breath fogged the air. The woods were still. And on the porch were small piles of rocks. 4 of them, each arranged like crude human figures. Head, arms, legs. They weren't there yesterday. Each pile was shaped like it had been stacked with care, balanced perfectly despite the wind. And next to them, in the snow-dusted dirt, were tracks, not boot prints. Bare feet, long, narrow toes. Dozens of them circling the cabin, some leading into the woods, some stopping just below the windows. We checked the trail camera we'd set up on a tree facing the porch. It had been turned, not just bumped, rotated perfectly 180 degrees to face the trees. That was enough. We packed our gear in silence, never speaking above a whisper. Every snap of a twig, every shift of wind made us flinch. We hiked out by noon, made it back to the car, and drove straight through the night. When we got home, I checked the program's online listing for that cabin. It was gone.
I've been a ham radio enthusiast for most of my adult life. There's something meditative about the quiet hum of the receiver, the subtle crackle of static as it combs through invisible waves, searching. It's like listening to a world just beneath this one, messages whispered between the seams of reality. One summer, I decided to rent an old shack deep in the Adirondacks. It belonged to another ham operator who'd passed away, and it was known among enthusiasts as a place with zero interference. No cell towers, no electrical lines, just mountains, forest, and sky. The perfect location to test long-range signals. The shack itself was a one-room structure, nestled between tall pine trees on the edge of a dried-up lake bed. Weathered wood, moss-covered shingles, and a porch that groaned with every footstep. Inside, it smelled of old books, solder, and damp wool. The radio setup was still there. Vintage gear in pristine condition, neatly labeled drawers, soldering kits, tubes, coiled wires, like someone had left expecting to return.
The first couple of nights were uneventful. I spent my time tuning into low-frequency bands, jotting down signal patterns, testing propagation. At night, I'd cope over a propane stove and read by lantern light. The silence was thick. No birds, no traffic, only wind threading through the trees and the low, constant hiss of static from the receiver. On the third day, just after dusk, something changed. I was monitoring a weak signal around 1.612 megahertz when the static began to pulse, soft at first, then sharper, more rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then came the numbers. 1, 6, 4, 9. 1, 6, 4, 9. A woman's voice. Calm, emotionless, clear. Like a number station, but not garbled or distorted. She repeated the same 4 digits over and over again, each with the same deliberate tone. I froze.
It wasn't a known station. I checked the frequency databases. Nothing listed. I scribbled down the sequence and hit record. The voice repeated for 23 minutes. Then silence. I tried to triangulate the source using a handheld directional antenna. It wasn't coming from any known beacon or structure. The signal strength fluctuated with direction, pulling me toward the northeast ridge, into the denser part of the forest. No towers, no satellites, just pine trees stretching toward the sky like bony fingers. That night, I dreamed of voices whispering behind the static. No words, just breath and rhythm. When I woke, the air felt charged, the kind of electric tension that comes before a lightning storm. On the 4th evening, I tried something different. I broadcast back.
"Who are you?" I said into the mic. I waited. Nothing. I repeated it twice more, then switched frequencies. Then again, still nothing. Then the signal stopped completely. The quiet was deafening. Later that night, sometime after 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by 3 sharp knocks on the front door. I froze in bed. The shack was dark. The lantern had gone out. Only a sliver of moonlight spilled through the window. Another knock. Slow, even, like someone was tapping with the side of a fist. I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and crept to the door. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then a soft sound, paper sliding against wood, like something being tucked beneath the door. I waited a full minute before moving. Then I slowly unlatched the door and opened it. No one was there. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. The pine needles whispered overhead. The moon hung low and yellow. On the porch, just below the threshold, was a scrap of paper, folded once, crisp and clean. I bent down, picked it up, and unfolded it. Inside, written in red ink, were 4 numbers: 1, 6, 4, 9. I dropped it. That was the code to unlock the primary signal box on my receiver. A code I had never written down, never spoken aloud, never shared. Only I knew it. The next morning, I tore down the station. I packed everything in silence and left the shack without finishing the lease. I haven't used that frequency since, but sometimes, late at night, I'll leave my radio on, just low enough to hear the static. And once, just once, I thought I heard her voice again. 1, 6, 4, 9. Only this time, she added something. You heard me. Now I see you. I haven't turned the radio on since.